Hello to everyone and welcome back into the channel for this week's review of the Swamp Thing Episode 2, Worlds Apart. I want to give a shout out to our new subscribers who just joined. We really appreciate that. Welcome aboard. And one last thing before we move forward. As usual, look out for spoilers, which will be all throughout this review. So without any further ado, let's get into it. We continue from the immediate events from the pilot episode, and the authorities are on the scene. It is here that we are introduced to the sheriff, Lucillia Cable, played by Jennifer Beals, who you may or may not know starred as the female lead in arguably one of the most iconic dance movies of all time, Flashdance. Here, her sex appeal is much more subdued as she plays a gruff sheriff in the swamp town Marais, as her and her son Matt begin to investigate Alec Holland's disappearance. Abby insists that there is something out there.
He look like a man.
And after Matt tries to offer that it is a bear, Sheriff Lucillia tells Abby to go home. But somewhere in the swamp is a creature that is coming to grips with its identity. The newly formed Swamp Thing begins recklessly to pull at himself in anguish. But in doing so, the little girl Susie, while in the hospital miles away, begins to mirror his actions. We have a brief moment with Abby and Liz after the search, and the takeaway from this scene is the transformation of Alec into the Swamp Thing seems to have cut short a romance that was destined to bud. Who knows? Could it still be possible? Now, as we return to the hospital, Susie tells Harlan some ambiguous information, but this is to show the audience that the Swamp Thing is now connected to her through the vegetation in her system. And despite Harlan, Susie seems to know what he's going through. And after Harlan exits the room, the tree branch tapping on the window becomes a clear indication of the swamp's beckoning call. Briefly, we join the Sunderland home, where Maria is still haunted by the loss of her daughter Shauna, as Avery tries in vain to console her. But as Abby wakes up, she is terrified by the haunting specter of her past friend. But she was merely dreaming. A little more on this later. Abby goes downstairs and is greeted by Liz's girlfriend. Once the girlfriend leaves, Abby and Liz begin to explore their options of getting to the bottom of Alec's disappearance. Quickly though, I do want to point out the fact that this conversation marks one of several times it is shown that Liz has an affinity with the police scanners. This helps to cover at length what could have been a potential plot hole in the season finale episode. Be that as it may, it is Avery's name that rises to the top, putting Abby on a path for a reunion with her foster father. Moments before her meeting with Avery, Abby is looking at pictures of Shauna, her best friend that died. It's clear to see that both she and Maria are still deeply affected by the loss in their own way. Abby's way was to leave town, pursuing a career in medicine, almost as if it was a treatment of sorts for what has afflicted her. So when Avery and Abby finally exchange pleasantries, Avery begins to try and alleviate some of the guilt that Abby obviously still carries, but more importantly, what Maria alone has cast on Abby by placing the blame of Shauna's death squarely on Abby's shoulders. And just when it seems like Avery Sunderland, of all people, has finally developed a new moral layer, Abby takes the professional approach and inquires about Alec's research in hopes to try to stop the spread of the disease. Avery won't have it, and once Abby mentions a court order, the closure that she seemed to be getting is quickly wiped away. Not only does Avery say that the information in Alec's lab is proprietary information and that he can't do it, he does reiterate that he'll always love her in a way that's more like,
"You're gonna be just fine. I'll take good care of you. I'm your #1 fan."
Maria desperately needs answers and seeks the counsel of Madame Xanadu, played by Gerald Prescott, who has also had a ton of work in Hollywood, but most notably she's lended her talents to the 2016 TV show Ray Donovan, as well as The Walking Dead. Maria says that she hears Shauna, her dead daughter. Madame Xanadu cautions her to let it rest, but Maria says she can't. And during the reading, Madame Xanadu falls to the floor screaming, while Maria is thrown into the glass door. Madame Xanadu then tells her of the shift in the darkness. And I gotta admit, while these elements do seem fantastical, it is quite entertaining to say the least. We then catch up to the dynamic duo, Abby and Liz, as they arrive at the place where Alec was renting out a room owned by Daniel Cassidy, played by Ian Ziering, who almost needs no introduction, having played in the original 90210 series and most recently starred in the Sharknado franchise. And in a meta moment, Daniel is rehearsing for a role and has already famously played the Blue Devil, which becomes important later on in the show. The two learn that Alec had to keep his work on Daniel's computer due to his being confiscated. Abby goes upstairs and again waxes emotional while watching Alec Holland's entries. But before she can get too caught up, she's informed by Holland that the girl Susie in the hospital has escaped. We are then introduced to a very significant character, Dr. Jason Woodrue, played by Kevin Durant, who has been in some major projects, including the Wolverine X-Men Origins and Russell Crowe's Robin Hood. Dr. Woodrue's wife is played by Selena Andrews, who played a role in the recent Stephen King adaptation Dr. Sleep, as well as The Haunting of Hill House. The two arrive at the Sunderland estate, and we soon learn that it was Dr. Jason Woodrue who was responsible for producing the accelerant that's being dumped in the swamp. It appears that the two cooked up a scheme for the chemical reaction of the mutagen to be sold for medical applications, and thus making a substantial profit. Straight away, Avery blames Jason for the green flu, but Jason claims his accelerant is not responsible. Avery insists that Jason find the cause of the sickness while threatening serious repercussions if he doesn't deliver. After receiving an anonymous call, Abby and Matt arrive at the swamp, where a local fisherman offers up Susie's hospital wristband. Lucillia arrives shortly afterwards and ends up warning Matt about his feelings towards Abby. And she's right, because Matt does admit later on that he's had a crush on her since high school, which now explains that awkward bear answer. Butterflies, right? Meanwhile, Susie, who was following the Swamp Thing's signal, so to speak, has stowed away on the game warden's boat, who in turn notices some men who are retrieving accelerant boxes from the swamp. But one of the men, fearful of what Avery will do to them if caught, stabs the game warden in the neck with a harpoon. While the man who stabbed the game warden is preparing to hide the body, he hears Susie splash in the swamp, and a chase ensues until Susie finds an old, half-submerged abandoned house to hide in. And just when the harpoon man is upon Susie, the Swamp Thing intervenes. Harpoon guy stabs the Swamp Thing, who becomes enraged and calls upon the vegetation in the swamp to capture the man and eventually rip him into pieces. Shortly afterwards, Abby arrives and becomes startled to see the Swamp Thing towering over Susie. Abby calls Susie to her, and the two along with Matt leave. But during the boat ride home, Susie repeats some of what she told Holland in the hospital, but lights Abby's mind aflame as Susie tells her that the creature said his name was none other than Alec. And finally, back at the Sunderland home, Avery checks on his wife Maria and does not notice or see Shauna appearing as pale as a ghost, lying beside Maria. Well, that just about wraps up this review of this episode and concludes this week's entry into Swamp Thing Saturdays. Hope you enjoyed it, and please leave a like if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and please stay safe. And until then, see you then.